And there you are, Karen. There's your time. You're done.
Good evening, everybody. Is this thing on? Take a second to get to your seats, get comfortable, get settled, make sure your cell phones are turned off, that kind of thing. We got about students that know me, I'm always looking at the watch going, all right, 30 seconds until class starts. I want to give you every minute to get comfortable. Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight to this 95th District Candidate Forum. This event has been organized and planned through the hard work of students at York College and partnering with the York chapter of the NAACP. So these students have created their organization, the History and Political Science Student Union, and is supported by myself, I'm John Altman, Chair of the Department of History and Political Science. The students, I'm going to make just a quick comment here that I'm going to leave it to the two organizations that are sponsoring the event tonight. And Sandra Thompson from the York chapter at NAACP is going to say a few words, and then the chairman or president of the History and Political Science Student Union, Andre Romanov, is going to say a few words and introduce the candidates, and we'll get on with the forum. But again, I want to thank you very much. It's quite an impressive turnout, and I've been telling a lot of people, I mean, these students, I have nothing to do with this. Not that I don't want to claim something goes, bad, but I told my supporters however they need, give you whatever guidance you need. They have, everything that is happening here that you see going on has been purely on the work that the students have done. Sandra Thompson.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I am happy to have this collaboration with York College, and thankful to Professors Dottie, the students, John Altman, as well as Andre Romanoff, for chairing this, and as well as the candidates for the House of Representatives and the legislative district. For coming and speaking to us today. And for York and AACP, I mean, these are things that we definitely do and are interested in because we are countywide, and this position does represent Spring Garden Township, West Manchester Township, West York, as well as York City. And some of these areas are hit hard by lack of education funding. Some of these areas are hit hard by income levels, where raising the minimum wage could be beneficial. Also having the access to affordable health care, as well as equitable funding in education and access to higher education and criminal justice reform and police accountability, which are all important things to us, which is important for us to know where these candidates fall on many positions. So we always encourage everyone to get out to vote, but also be an informed voter. So we're glad for this forum. We're glad for all of you that are here. We're glad for it looks as though there may be some audio and video, but for all the knowledge to be spread, we hope that you speak to your neighbors, your relatives, your sons and daughters, whoever, your friends, your colleagues. Get them out to vote because it's important to vote on all levels. It's a very contentious presidential election. However, from whoever's in charge needs backing also for whatever their initiatives are. And on the state level, one of these persons are going to either continue what's going on in Harrisburg or help or hinder, however else it may be. So you need to know who they are, what they bring. Thank you.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming. As has been mentioned, I am Andrew, the chairman of the History and Political Science Student Union here on campus. and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you to this public forum for candidates running for the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in the 95th District. This forum is sponsored by the History and Political Science Student Union, a student association in the Department of History and Political Science with the goal of promoting student engagement and involvement, as well as the York NAACP and York College. We ask that for the duration of this event, you act with civility and respect. The event is being filmed and photographed, so we hope sincerely to have constructive dialogue and an honest and open discussion of the issues that the residents of the 95th District are faced with. Special thanks to Ms. Lori Nolte and Dr. John Altman of the Department of History and Political Science here at York College, Ms. Sandra Thompson of the York NAACP, Mr. Brendan Berg of the Hill Evans campaign, and Ms. Jenna Geezy of the Mr. Sears campaign for their help and cooperation in organizing this event. Can we please give them a round of applause? And of course, thank you, Ms. Hill Evans and Mr. Sears, for agreeing to participate in this forum and address the audience here tonight. Can we please give a round of applause to the candidates? This forum will last for about an hour of time until 7 p.m. and include two sessions. First for priorly selected questions and second for an open question and answer period, during which members of the audience will have the opportunity to ask their questions. The first session will be moderated by Jacob Taylor and the second session will be moderated by Nicholas Longstreet. Christian Harris, who is seated in the first row, our co-chair for administration, will time the candidates' responses. For each question, the candidates will have 2 minutes to respond. There will be no time for rebuttal. So thank you all again for joining us tonight, and as time is limited, we will now move into the first session. Please welcome to the stage Jacob Taylor, our co-chair for community outreach.
Thank you all again for being here. Time's limited, so we're going to get going. All right, so the coin toss was conducted before we sat down this evening. Mr. Sears won the coin toss and elected to go second, so the first question will be from Ms. Carol Evans. The first question, the 2016-2017 state budget totals $31.35 billion, a $1.2 billion increase from the 2015-2016 budget. In your opinion, should the budget be increased, cut, or remain at the current levels, and what areas do you believe need to be cut or further funded?
I think, without actually having read the budget, it would be difficult for me to say whether it should increase or decrease. So I'm gonna fall in the middle, and I'm gonna say that currently where it is adequate. I do, however, feel like some of the line items within the budget could be moved, and the main one that I would move or switch around or increase it to the one end as we're decreasing on some of the fluff that's in the budget would be for education. Education is extremely important. I think that some of the funding that was cut during the Corbett administration, up to the tune of $1 billion, has affected the schools statewide. And so while I don't want to see an increase in the total budget, I think that going line item by line item is essential. Having worked on New York City's budget, which is not near what the state budget is, but just having the experience of knowing that line items in certain areas can be cut to improve areas in other line items in other areas. And so as we're looking at the budget, as I'm looking at the budget, I would definitely be taking a look at seeing what items within there could be cut so that we could increase our levels for education. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sears, the same question to you.
Having taken a look at that budget, I would tell you that it probably could have been held exactly where it was or maybe even cut slightly. And I say it because there was a $3 billion study that came out of a group called the Taxpayer Caucus. You mind if I pick this up? And some of the items that we look at that really do make sense at the state level are duplication of services and other kinds of overlaps that would give us an opportunity to take some of the low-hanging fruit off the budget in the form of waste and duplication, so we can get a lot more bang for our buck without raising taxes. As far as allocating that to education, I have no problem with that whatsoever. But I would suggest that before we do that, we take a good hard look at what it actually costs to educate our kids. Having been on 2 school boards for the last 4 years and having seen it from 2 different perspectives, I can tell you that we have a problem with allocation as much as a problem with the amount. In other words, we might say that the York City system suffers because they need more money. And I know one of the things where they really took a hit was on the loss of their reimbursement of charter school tuition. Well, for those of you that are wonks like me, here's a chart that shows how we reimburse charter schools here in the state of Pennsylvania. And if you have time afterward, I want to share this with you so you can see just exactly how irrational this system is. This is one of the ways to straighten out the costing. As you start to build on what it actually costs to educate children, and you put the core education costs and those things that actually add to that for kids, for example, that are in disadvantaged situations or need special education on top of their basic education, we can find that money. But we really have to take a good hard look at the disallocation of funds that are currently available.
Thank you both very much. The next question will be for you, Mr. Sears. The 95th district serves some of the most under-resourced and underserved population in the county and in the state. In your history, what have you done by practice or policy to bring resources and services to these communities to date, and what are you planning to do if elected?
As a school board member, I didn't really have much of an opportunity to bring resources beyond Spring Garden Township, at least to a degree. And essentially what we could do there, and what I did try to do, is hold the line on taxes. That was about the only thing we could do. On the intermediate unit board, on the other hand, the deal there was to try to be more competitive so that the services could be offered to the member districts and keep those services in the unit where I believe they belong, instead of having them come back out into the member districts, where I don't think it was sufficiently delivered. I mean, after all, you've got 1,200 specialists in special education who really understand what they're doing, and I think that's where it belongs. I work very hard on the unit as a board member to keep those resources active and competitive.
Thank you very much. Ms. Hill-Evans, the same question to you. Absolutely. The 95th district serves some of the most under-resourced and underserved populations in York County and in the state. In your history, what have you done by practice or policy to bring resources and services to these communities to date, and what are you planning to, or what is your plan to do more if elected?
Okay. While I didn't serve on the school board, I did serve on the recovery plan for the York City School District. I served on all 3 of the phases that they had, and in that capacity, we met with school districts across the county. We met with their supervisors, we met with their superintendents, just to discuss the ideas, to get some of their ideas, to see how they were being successful in their capacity while we were not being so successful within New York City School District. We shared a lot of ideas. We traveled to the Midwest when we were looking at the possibility of charterization for the New York City School District. We met, we discussed, we weighed the differences between good, bad, good and evil, and we came to the conclusion that it is a funding, it's a funding issue. And so what I would do when I get to Harrisburg is to take a look at that hold harmless law that holds a school district, it holds them harmless in the event where they lose students. So they get the same funding. They cannot receive any less funding than they did the year before, regardless of whether they have the same amount of students or fewer students. So a school district that one year had maybe 5,000 students, the next year only has 1,000 students, would still be receiving funds as if it was 5,000 students. That means that that funding then cannot follow the students into the school district where they are going to be attending schools, and it would affect their, in terms of being able to offer the resources that they need in order to get the kind of quality education that they deserve.
Thank you. The next 2 questions are going to be based around government relations with the citizenry. So the first one of those will be for you, Ms. Hill-Evans. Over the past few years, there's been a growing discontent between the community and public servants. This has been highlighted by the recent controversy with former Attorney General Kathleen Kane. If elected, how would you work to better the relationship between public servants and the community?
I think as a public servant, it's vitally important to be sure that you don't allow your ego to get in the way of what you know to be right and wrong. And I think in the case of Ms. King, I was disappointed because it wasn't so much the crime as it was the cover-up. And so it's important as a public servant to be sure that those people who are working with you, who are working for you, are accountable, and that they hold you as a public servant accountable. So that, I mean, they have to have the freedom to know that they can come to you and say, hey, you're doing that wrong, you need to stop it, you're going to get in trouble, and know that you are going to take their advice. And conversely, you have to be able to have people around you that you know you can trust, and that you know are going to be able to feel free enough to come to you and give you direction. You have to be a strong enough leader and self-assured enough to be able to take direction from those folks who are reporting to you. You have to hold yourself to a higher standard, because as a public servant and as an elected official, that's not just the expectation. It's just unheard of, in my opinion, not to be that. And so as a public servant, I have always held myself to the kind of values that I was raised on, those of honesty and integrity, and I work with a council that can tell me if they think that I'm heading in the wrong direction. We have those kinds of conversations. They're important and critical to being able to serve the community of residents and those who have put us into office. It's what we owe to ourselves, but more importantly, it's what we owe to the constituents that got us into office in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sears, the same question to you, sir.
I think that the fundamental relationship that needs to be developed or reinforced is that between the representative of each individual in the district. Now, that's a tall order. 66,000 people in the district. But you can peel that back, I guess, in the sense that face-to-face contact with 20,000 would probably do the job, because that spills over to the children and some of the other people that might live in the same households. So as a representative of the district, this is the message that I've been delivering for the last 6 months, and it's been transformative. It's a one-on-one proposition that the bond between the representative and the individuals in the district is the #1 way to rebuild that trust. If they hear me say something and they watch me do it, that's one step toward rebuilding trust in at least one person. That becomes infectious. If you see other representatives doing the same thing, that will help build that bond of trust as well. We can see the same sort of thing with, unfortunately, with our police these days, the kinds of relationships in the community that have been poisoned by some bad actors that need to be dealt with and dealt with severely. But I think we all would agree that the vast majority of the people who serve as police and firefighters are doing a job that most of us wouldn't want to do, and they do it with valor. I think we have to look at representatives, senators, congressmen at the U.S. level and so forth in the same regard. We have got to do something to rebuild the trust, and frankly, it starts one-on-one. I can't make you trust somebody else, but I can hope to help build the trust that you might have in me.
Thank you very much. The next question will be for you, Mr. Sears. Relations have become increasingly strained in the community and between the community and police and the community and public officials. Another example being the mayor of West York. Since the 95th District is such a diverse area, do you have any plans to positively improve these relationships, and if so, how?
Well, I think we actually had a great start last week or the week before when the York City Police Department reopened its West End office. Community policing is critical. Police are servants of the public, and I think there's a diligent amount of activity being undertaken by our own police forces. And I've heard the commitment made by the incoming mayor of West York, Sean Mount, to do the same thing, and that's to re-educate police so that they understand that their job is not to go snatch people, their job is not to maximize fines, their job is to support public safety. And as I said before, I think the vast majority are doing that. There has, however, been, I think, sadly throughout the nation, a focus on kind of a snatch and grab approach to policing, and it's a very difficult thing to change. If you're a career police officer and that's the way you've been taught, and that's the way you've operated for years, you continue to do it. While I was canvassing, believe it or not, I actually saw an example of that in West York, and it was appalling. Those are the kinds of, and I can give you a quick synopsis of that. There was a little junction that apparently is used quite frequently to track people. You catch somebody going the wrong way on a one-way street. The way the police treated the driver was as if this person had been somebody involved in a great train robbery. I never saw anything like it, and I was actually right there when it happened. Those are the kinds of things that do nothing whatsoever to increase the confidence of the citizens in their police force. So those are the kinds of behaviors that need to be changed. And I think that those are the sorts of things that people in Harrisburg can influence, but let's all be honest about it. The implementation is going to happen at the local level. So we in Harrisburg are enablers of that sort of thing. We certainly have to call police forces out that abuse power. We are examples of that. We also have to help praise those who do the job right.
Thank you very much, sir. Ms. Hillens, the same question to you.
Okay, so what have I done so far? So far, I've met with the police chief, the incoming police chief over in West York. I've had conversations with our own mayor. I've talked to a lot of our residents. And I agree with Mr. Sears in that community policing is critical. And so it's why in the city, we started some years ago, and although the funding had to be cut and some of those programs had to be taken away, we found very quickly that community policing really is critical. And it is training, yes, it's training at the police level, but it's also interaction. And it's interaction within our neighborhoods. I think that community policing is like in increments and small chunks. And once we have our police that are doing our take 30s, and they take 30 minutes to walk through the community, and not just walk, but to knock on doors, to stop and introduce themselves, to make sure that the neighbors know that they are there for them, and to try to build those kind of concrete relationships, so that when we have incidents within our neighborhoods, and then the larger part within our community, we soon find that it's we can go to our neighbors, the police can go to the neighbors, and they can have these conversations, and they're more likely to have cooperation, which is critical. When you have the relationships between a community and the police where there's no conversation and nobody's saying anything, it makes it extremely difficult to get anything done. So community policing at the neighborhood level, I believe, is critical.
Thank you very much. Next question will be for you, Ms. Hillens. One of the most pressing issues currently facing the city of York is the opioid epidemic that has claimed the lives of hundreds of people over the last 2 years. If elected, what actions would you take in the legislature to help combat this epidemic?
Okay, I just want to say that it's not just a city issue. It's actually a county issue, which is a larger issue, and it's an issue within our total 95th district. So it's not concentrated in the city as much as it is, we're finding, as it is out in the county. The city has just by dint of the fact that it has a larger population, would have possibly more numbers. But what would I do if I'm in Harrisburg? The first thing I would do would be to be sure that there is enough funding for aid, for education, for treatment. I would be working very hard with our judicial system to be sure that those folks who are addicts, who have issues with drugs, are getting treatment as opposed to being incarcerated. And so what I could do, and what I would do at the state level, is just to be sure, as we were talking earlier about budget items, is to be sure that we have enough money within that budget item, that line item, to be sure that we have enough money to be sure that folks who need the treatment are getting the treatment that they need.
Thank you very much. Mr. Sears?
Treatment is absolutely essential. From the standpoint of what can be done in Harrisburg, leadership at the very top, and I think the governor's done a great job of identifying the severity of this problem. The Centers of Excellence program is off and running. I think that's a great way to start. Specifically, though, I think it's important to understand that the legislature is actually working on some very well-defined legislation. Just like any legislation, it needs to be whittled down a little bit. Let me just give you a recap of a couple of them. Senate Bill 1212 establishes something called the School-Aged Children Opioid Awareness Education Program. So this is a commitment by the state to build a curriculum and fund the progress so that kids know early on what they're up against if there's ever a temptation. Obviously, that's not going to stop everything, but I think the elderly education is a great first step. There's another one called Senate Bill 1367 that limits the amount of opioids that children can be prescribed. And this is part of the broader problem, over-prescribing medications. So this is a very practical way to cut down the supply of painkillers that in many cases lead our children and adults into a life of opioid addiction. The third bill is something called Senate Bill 1368 that implements a opioid prescribing curriculum in Pennsylvania's medical schools. This makes the doctors and the doctors-to-be aware of their responsibilities. Very practical steps that can be taken to do something to try to at least raise the level of awareness. There are others that have to do with the numbers of pills that might be available on prescription. I know in my own case, and I think in my wife's case, there were situations where the pain medication was prescribed by a dentist of all people. It was a 90-day supply. 90-day supply. And it might have taken 2 or 3 days to take care of the really severe pain. So those are some of the practical steps that I think really have to be taken.
Thank you very much. Our last of these scripted questions has to do with tax rates in New York City. Currently, if a family wanted to move to the city of York and purchase a house on property that was appraised at $100,000, they would expect to pay a property tax combined of just under $30,000. If elected, what steps would you take to make the city of New York a more attractive place to start a family and a more attractive place to start a business?
Well, you played right into my hand. Thank you. You know that my number one issue for years has been the elimination of school property tax. It turns out that school property tax in the city is a little bit more than half the tax load. And as you start looking at the situation realistically, what does this do to property values? It hammers it. This is not something that's unique to the city of York. I would tell you that every metropolitan area in the United States of America that depends on property taxes is taxing themselves into bankruptcy. We're at a point right now in the city, and it's growing out into the county as well. I'll just use the city as an example. For every dollar that you pay in principal and interest on your mortgage, on a well-structured mortgage, on fairly appraised property, you'll pay $1 in property taxes. Now that means you can never own your home. If you walked in with $50,000, we'll use your example, $100,000, you wrote a check for $100,000 to buy that house, you would still have a tax bill that's equal to half of what you would have paid on a mortgage, or equal to what the mortgage payment would have been. It depresses property values, it prevents renters from getting out of a rental situation to buy properties, and it prevents investors from coming to the area and improving their properties. I've had dozens and dozens and dozens of conversations with homeowners from all walks of life, from renters from all walks of life, from developers, from landlords, and every one of them, and amazingly, even the renters say the school property tax elimination would help them immensely. It would also give us, not only as the city and the district and the Commonwealth, the most business-friendly atmosphere in the entire Middle Atlantic region. And that's what we need. We need to have something that's broad-based and provides an incentive that doesn't require the dangling of carrots, tax abatements, and other targeted schemes that ultimately have to be paid for by the rest of us. The folks understand that. The people in the neighborhoods get it. If they live in a $40,000 house, they know they're subsidizing the abatements.
Thank you very much, sir. Ms. Evans, same question to you.
Okay, I'll go to what I said earlier. I think this is a district-wide program because when we talk about housing, affordable housing, we're not talking about just New York City. We're talking about the 95th district. So we need to look at it district-wide. And I think when we talk about property tax reform, which I use reform as opposed to total elimination because reform is really the more responsible way to go. Yes, we can eliminate those, but then we also stand in danger of eliminating some of the education because, as we know, under the current system, our property taxes go directly toward educating our children. And so we need to look at education, economic development, jobs, affordable living, and property tax reform, and all of those are a direct relationship to how our cost of living is going to be in the district. We need to become an incubator for new and innovative jobs, and as I look around the room, I see many of you who I'm hoping will be our future, or who are future entrepreneurs, who are going to want to move into the district, remain in the district, and create the jobs, make your dream jobs, so that you can then become employers and you can create jobs for others. I think we need to promote our district as a place, a destination that people want to come. A proximity of our relationship to Harrisburg, Baltimore, Philadelphia, New York, all those places. We have natural beauty in our area in terms of rail trail, and then we have a rising arts and a cultural heritage. And all of those things are things that we need to promote. Once promoted, then we're more attractive. We become more attractive. We get more folks to come in here to buy our properties, and that in itself will drive down the cost of living.
Thank you very much to the both of you. That concludes the scripted questions for this evening. It's now my pleasure to introduce Mr. Nicholas Longstreet, who will be conducting the open-ended audience responses.
All right, at this time, I'm going to ask if anyone in the audience has any questions for the candidates. All right, young lady right in the front here.
All right, this is sort of long. There is a debate about whether Black Lives Matter mean that blue lives don't matter, which often stems from a call for police accountability and transparency. There is pending legislation to make it more difficult to obtain the names of officers involved in police shootings, and pending legislation to make it difficult to obtain police body cam footage. What is your position on police accountability and transparency under these circumstances? And this, I would think, for both of you.
Ms. Carroll.
All lives matter. Black, white, blue, they all matter. What we've done, as I've been on council, is that we had grants that have provided our police force with body cams. We knew that that was coming. We raised questions as to what were the policies going to be surrounding people being able to get the information, names being released, whether they were names of victims, whether they were names of the police officers that were involved. We asked for and received, and were able to then review and amend and make recommendations on a policy surrounding the police cams that we have for the city of York. I would, as in terms of what I would do when I get to Harrisburg, I would want to take that same idea to Harrisburg. Be sure that we have legislation that is in place that is going to regulate what the information, how it can be used, how long it's going to be held, what's going to happen to it when we're done with it. Is it going to be burned? Is it going to be kept for a certain amount of time? How are we going to dispose of this? And so I have the experience, having worked on the legislation and reviewed the policy at the municipal level, that I could take that same experience to Harrisburg.
But what is your position on that information being available?
I think it ought to be available. It's public information. I think it ought to be available.
Okay, so that was the basic question.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Well, I think the question of availability opens up something that we might call the brave new world of the internet. My concern, not so much about transparency, is the way things can be manipulated when they've been taken out of official hands and put into the hands of the amateurs who like to go viral on YouTube and that sort of thing. So there's obviously a need to be very, very careful about what happens after the release takes place. It's almost impossible to get it back. And this stuff can be pushed around the internet in a flash of an eye. It's just an amazing problem. So to me, it's a walk before you run. It's not a close the gate on it. I know that the city has policies on body cams, when to use them and when not to use them. I think those sorts of things need to be publicized, and not just the city, but any police force that uses body cams needs to inform their constituents what those policies are. Because as I understand it, not everything is filmed. Not everything is subject to the use of the body cam, even though it's on the officer at the time. And I don't think most of us know what those policies are. So I would certainly start with some disclosure of policy and then move from there. It's a walk before you run proposition because, once that horse is out of the barn, you're not getting it back. So we need to be very, very careful. I think your other question had to do with identifying the officers. I know that in some jurisdictions there have been threats on officers' lives because their names were disclosed, and that's a concern. I don't know how you control that, but I think with deliberation and probably even with the buy-in of the officers and their unions and so forth, that can be bridged as well.
Man in the blue shirt over here.
Thank you. Let me state that first, I am not anti-public employee, nor am I anti-nice pension, because my wife and I both live on a pension. But it seems like, of the many issues facing our state finances, pension reform has to be one of the major ones. And I would ask each candidate how they view the structure of the pensions now in effect, and what would they see as a way that we could get, let's say, pensions back on an even keel, so that the state is not always looking to the taxpayer to fund an already overburdened constituency. Thank you.
Mr. Sears.
I look at it really two different ways. One of those is the structural issue. In other words, what is the pension plan? For the most part, state employees today are on defined benefit plans. I shouldn't say for the most part, they all are. People have talked about converting from defined benefits to defined contribution plans. Some of the reform that frankly is just rejected in the legislature was something called a stacked hybrid. And that would start with a defined benefit at about a $50,000 level and then build a defined contribution plan on top of that. At the municipal level, which is another serious problem, you hear this term cash balance plan, which is a kind of a modified defined benefit. I think the question that you're asking really relates to the structure and how you can get us out of this structural problem. One way to do that is through a transition, but I think we all need to be realistic. We owe the retirees and we owe the current employees the plan that they signed up for, and we're not going to back ourselves out of that. There may be conversations. It could actually get to the point where the fund is so upside down that there have to be conversations with current retirees and current employees in those plans for them to give a little bit. I know in the city, for example, the police gave on there. Some of the retirees gave a little bit of a reduction in their cost of living allowances, and that helped. The second piece of this, which to me is the one that we all worry about, is the payment crisis. In the school districts today, and in any state agency, 34% of salary is paid by the employer into the pension plan. There's no pension plan in private industry that even comes close to that, whether it's a true pension plan or a matching 401k or something like that. A more normal number is like what we have in Social Security, 7% or so on the part of the employee and 7% or so on the part of the employer. The difference in the 95th legislative district, that 27% difference would fund 210 full-time teachers. That's the extent that this thing has grown to. We have to find a way to take that difference out of the school budgets, put it at the state level where it belongs, and solve it.
All right.
Okay, so when we're talking about pensions, we're talking about both municipal and state pensions, and it's kind of not a good idea to look at one without looking at the other, because they both need to be addressed. And so let's take a look at both of these pensions, and let's remember that what we have is not a benefit problem, it is a debt problem. And we're talking about $66 billion in debt for our pension plans. And so it's important for us to not treat it as though we're going to withdraw benefits in order to make this go away, because taking away people's benefits is not the answer. The debt is still going to remain. So we need to take a look at how are we going to address the debt that goes along with these pension plans. And so one of the things that we can do is by increasing penalties on those municipalities that don't pay their minimum municipal obligation, their MMO. If they don't pay that on time, we increase the penalties. And so that helps to bring down the debt. It makes them stay on point to make sure that they are paying their obligations when they're due, so that that money doesn't continue to grow. That $66 billion doesn't continue to grow. We can eliminate state aid to be spent on administrative expenses. So when we're asking people to pay the money towards the pensions, that is going directly towards the pensions and not towards administrative costs. So those are just a couple of the ways, the things that we could do in Harrisburg to take care of the debt of pensions, as opposed to trying to take away any benefits.
Okay, next question. Over in the back, in the red.
Okay, this is probably the last question to be asked in this forum, but I would really like to know what is your position in legislation that will require police officers to inquire about immigrant status? You want me to repeat that?
Yes, please.
Okay, I would like to know what is your position on legislation that will require police officers to inquire about immigration status?
Okay. Well, if they're not asking me about my immigration status, and they're not asking Mr. Sears about his immigration status, I don't think they should be asking anyone about their immigration status.
No, ma'am.
Was that the question?
No, ma'am. What my question was is, what is your position on legislation? I mean, what would you inquire about that law to allow police officers to take an action as an immigration officers? You know what I mean? Like, this is probably the last question to be asked in this forum because there's not very many Hispanic here, but this is a representation about of the immigration community, the immigrant community. So that was my question. I would really like to know what would your position on legislation to allow police officers to inquire about immigrant status on the community, on the citizens.
Okay, and if I'm understanding it correctly, I would not be in favor of legislation that would allow police to ask about immigration status of certain classes of people if they're not going to be asking that same question of everyone. Because to me, that's discriminatory, and I would not ever be in support of discriminatory legislation.
I don't favor such legislation.
Do we have any other questions from the audience? Man in the back in the black jacket.
Yes. Hi. Unfortunately, for a number of years, the state, unfortunately, for a number of years, the state legislature has been regarded as gridlocked and obstructive. And what I would like to know is how would your election to the House of Representatives 95th District address that? So that, you know, legislation can get onto the floor for a vote and out of committee.
I guess that's mine. I think you're really onto something, Salome. There is a tremendous difference, and really, if you look at the two chambers, you'll see that the Senate's a little bit better at moving things from committee to the floor. I say a little bit better. The House is probably the place where most of the gridlock takes place. The only way that I think an individual can deal with that situation is to, first of all, commit to it, and then second, understand what the issues are, and third, be able to communicate as convincingly and as rationally as possible why a particular bill or an amendment needs to move forward. You know, you think about the purpose of legislators literally is to deal with legislation. And if nothing gets to the floor for an up or down vote, it's impossible to move the ball forward. So you take your skills of analysis, persuasion, your personal skills, all the things you try to develop along the way through your business and civic careers, and bring those to bear at the committee level first. Do that informally, in face-to-face meetings with colleagues, and move that thing, whatever that thing happens to be, on the floor for a vote and for resolution.
And I agree that those are all good qualities to have as an individual. But it takes more than just one person. And so you have to always and also be able to collaborate with others. So yes, conversation is good, collaboration is another one. And then there are times when you're just going to have to make some concessions. And while some people think that making concessions is a bad thing, if you want to get bill moved in Harrisburg, there are times when you're just going to have to concede to a point and compromise. And so it takes all of those qualities. It takes being able to and willing to stand up for everything that you believe in, and even knowing that a bill might not be what you want it to be. It's give and take. And so if you can concede on one bill, knowing that the next bill that is even more important and more critical will be passed, then that's what you do. So it's compromise, it's collaboration, it's communication. And that's how I would make sure that even being one out of 203 representatives, that I would drive home the point of how critical this bill is, and whatever I would need to do in terms of collaboration and or compromise in order to make that bill happen and get on the floor so that it can be presented for a vote is exactly what I'm going to do.
All right, thank you. That should,
I have one more question. Do you have time?
we do have time, yes, ma'am.
This is about money, which is the blood of elections. Okay, this is for both of you. Your donors, your sponsors, however you want to name them, do you have allegiance to them? If so, what kind? Would you speak to that, please?
I have allegiance to the constituents and the electorate that will, I hope, put me in Harrisburg. That's my allegiance. I have been endorsed by very many unions, and I've gotten their endorsement because they know that I will fight to make sure that we keep jobs here in our district. But I won't compromise my values, and I certainly won't compromise theirs. So my allegiance, first of all, is to God, but my allegiance to any organization or any donor, regardless of what the amount of money that they may have contributed to my campaign, has nothing to do with my values. And my values as an elected official now and in the future is uncompromising.
I really think it's well said, Carol. Thank you. We are both, I think, a product of an upbringing that really says, if you believe in me and you want to make a contribution to me, I'm going to thank you, but I'm not going to serve you. I'm going to serve the constituents. If you're a constituent, you'll get the same level of service that any other constituent does, with or without a contribution. And since you mentioned that, let me just wave a little exhibit here. This is a letter that I received very early on in my campaign with a $50 check from a gentleman in Monroe County who's about to lose his business and his house due to property taxes. I'll just cut to the chase. He believes that his property values are about 50% of what they should be. I have no idea what that should be. But I do know that he's saying that his property taxes have increased by a factor of 3 since 2001. He's desperate. He's in a business that the family's owned for 60 years and it's about to close. I don't have allegiance to him as an individual, but I certainly have allegiance to that cause. And I think that's why he contributed. I believe that's why other people contribute. They know what I stand for. they believe that I'm the one that can take those initiatives forward and do something beneficial for everybody in the district. And we need funding to do that. We have to get the message out. Little yard signs are $3 a piece or something like that. These things are not cheap, and for us to communicate with you effectively, we have to be able to raise some funds.
All right, thank you. That concludes the audience participation part of this forum. And now to come back up, Mr. Andre Brunel.
Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, in the beginning of our event, we neglected to have an opening statement period. So instead of that, we're going to have a couple of questions for you. First question will be much like an opening statement question. What do you candidates think or feel that voters should know about you as a person, as a professional, as a worker, in order for them to really get to know you as a person rather than a candidate or a politician? I apologize. Who went last? Mr. Sears. Mr. Sears.
Well, our district has 66,000 people in it, and in the course of the last 6 months, I've touched just over 10,000 doors and had face-to-face conversations with about 3,000 people. The reason I mention that is because it shows you a little bit about what I guess I would call some grit. When I first entered this process, having done all the, say 35 years worth of business, the 11 years in the military, all the education, all the things that we all think we need to go through to get where we are in life, and whether it takes 50 years to get there or 20 years to get there. I know we have a lot of young folks here that are anxious to get into public service almost from the time they graduate. Something happens to help you make that transition. And I think that for me, it's the contact that I've had with people throughout my entire career, whether I was in the military, whether I was in private business, whether I was on the school board, whether I was serving on a church committee, whether I was leading my band, doing all kinds of fun stuff, raising kids, going through the aggravation and so forth. I guess what I'm trying to say, and I hope I can say this convincingly, is that it builds character. And whether you like my character or not, you're going to see it immediately. When we have an encounter, you're going to see almost immediately what kind of guy you're dealing with. I've had 3,000 opportunities to do that as recently as this afternoon. People that I'm having conversations with that outside of this experience I would have never met. There would have been no reason for me to have these conversations. Every single one of those is transformative. And I think it begins to show. And I think, frankly, it shows in Carol. She's done the same thing. She's been in public service. She has relationships with thousands of people. That's how you do it. You can't, I just don't think you can fake this.
So, who I am is a born and raised Yorker. Went through the public school system, graduated from York High, started my college career at Gettysburg, came home, got married, had babies, raised those babies, went to work at Caterpillar, worked there for 27 years, and in that capacity met very many people in good times and bad times. And it helped me to develop, as a person, a compassion for people who were being faced with difficult and rough times. When Caterpillar closed, bringing in those families, those husbands and spouses, and explaining to them what they were going to have to live on for the rest of their lives, and being able to do it in such a way that they didn't dissolve into tears. They were able to face a future. Then going back to school and getting my college degree as an adult and as a mother and as a grandmother.